Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali on TV1.
And a very good evening to you and a warm welcome to Newsline. My guest today is an economist, Mr. Talal Rafi. We took this subject of economy because it clearly affects the lives of every Sri Lankan directly and indirectly too, including by indirectly, I mean people who are not at work or who are students and so on. But honestly, the economy affects us all. And I'd like to welcome you on the program, Talal. Thank you for being my guest again. May I start with this question? When one is bereft of dollars, it's empty, virtually. Dr. Nandalal is probably going to be a bald man by the time he finishes at the central bank. All his hair might be lost because he's pulling his hairs out. But in this drive towards growing the economy, towards getting more dollars in and getting better deals from our lenders and even from our buyers of various product and so on, how much is reputation important? The reason I ask this question is that this morning, for example, we had, and in the last few days, we've had a potentially could be a negative impact on Sri Lanka's image. And instead, it beggars belief to me that instead of trying to fix the problem, they're trying to fix the media. But that's a different question. My question to you is, how much is reputation important when it comes to growing our economy, dealing with overseas markets, and so on?
So thank you very much, Faraz, for having me on your show. It's an absolute pleasure. And reputation matters a lot. You know, that's how that's one criteria how the credit agencies rate us. So right now, a lot depends, like, for example, to get back access to international capital markets, which will take some time, but at least to move away from our default status, we need to get the external debt restructuring done. And a lot depends on how our, I say this, a lot of people say that, we have walked out of a number of about 7 out of 16 IMF programs in the past. But here it's different. Here we have gone as a defaulted country, and also most of our creditors, China, India, though they may not be getting a principal haircut, a haircut on their principal amount, they will be taking some sort of a cut. So they are going to make sure that we are going to toe the line. So this is basically, to say it plainly, this is our last chance. If we are going to go down the same path and go default once again, I don't think any country is going to trust us and, take a sort of a haircut or anything other than certain, players like the ISP holders who will be obviously asking lending with very high interest rates. So reputation matters a lot. And the fact that we have not completed around half of the IMF program impacts us a lot. And also, the other thing is, we've had a very bad fiscal discipline for the past 7 decades. Even if you look at the primary budget surplus, it's only been achieved 4 times in the past 75 years. So when I say a primary budget surplus, it's excluding the interest payments. Even then, we cannot balance our budgets.
Okay, so reputation is very important, as you say. And it remains to be seen how the Sri Lankan government will deal with that. Because the reputation is something that the private sector does up to only a point. The wider picture is, for want of a better word or term, the baby that belongs to the government. It's the government's baby. But Talal, let's ask you this question: what should be done specifically to grow Sri Lanka's economy?
So that's a very important question. So I've given talks, sometimes stretching over an hour on to go that, but just to be very, very blunt and straightforward, I'll just go through 5 points in my view are the most important, though we can talk about a half a dozen or even more than a dozen points. The first thing is, I think if you look at Sri Lanka's past history, one of the biggest problems is, as I mentioned, fiscal indiscipline. So the government spends more than it earns. So right now, so basically, the fiscal deficit is being funded by two ways. One is borrowing from the public or from foreign creditors. And especially when it comes to local borrowing, it's borrowing from state banks. So this results in a crowding out effect, and the cost of borrowing for the private sector is high. The other thing is, the most important thing is monetary financing, that the lack of independence of the central bank. So the central bank has been funding this. So consistent, when I say monetary financing, it's basically printing money. So this means when you compare Sri Lanka to the rest of the South Asian countries, we've had consistently a higher rate of inflation. So when there is higher inflation, that means for real interest rates to be positive, interest rates are higher. So borrowing costs are higher. So naturally, our businesses are less competitive. So that's the first thing. So central bank independence is most important. The second thing is free trade agreement. One thing is what most people don't realize is that, there's a lot of talk about export-oriented industry. So to do that, if you want to get involved in trade, 70% of global trade is supplying global value chains. So by global value chains, I mean, like, for example, Apple, when it produces an iPhone, it imports components from 34 different countries. So supplying the value chain of Apple and other large companies is constituting about 70% of global trade. So this is after the 1980s, after globalization took off. And this was how China, Vietnam, South Korea, they're all going up the ladder. Even India is taking into this. So this is important because if you look at Sri Lanka is one of the most protected economies in the world. So we have a lot of import barriers.
Yes. Now,
so, for example,
sorry, Talal, to interrupt you, but so far what you've said to grow the economy is mainly by cutting down on existing bad practices, like what you've just mentioned, protectionism and so on. But in real terms, apart from that, I mean, not to discount what you've said, but what else? How do you get the farmers to produce more, the gem merchants to produce more, to mine more, and cut and polish more, and in that case export? In those terms, how do you get I can use this name because it belongs to our group, and proudly so. How do you get the Eslons of this world and P pluses of this world to produce more? How do you get the economy going? Because no point Eslon producing more if there aren't enough customers with enough money to buy their product, is there?
Exactly.
So, how do you do that?
Just to give an example of Eslon, that's exactly my point. So for Eslon to produce more, there has to be a higher demand in the country. So for that, one thing is like when we look at Sri Lanka, the Sri Lankan market is quite small, 22 million people, just an $80 billion economy, and now it's contracted also. So what we have to focus is, like, if you look at an example of Israel has been seen as an example of a country that's grown, because from the very beginning a business sets up there, they don't look at the Israel market. They look at global expansion because it's a tiny country. So the same way, as I mentioned, my second point, we need to have more free trade agreements. So we only have 3. Vietnam has 12. And if you look at Vietnam's trade to GDP ratio, it's over 100. So if you look at countries such as Singapore, Switzerland, their import to GDP ratio is also 100, but their export is also 100. So coming back to your point, look at encourage more firms to sort of look outside to export. To do that, you also have to allow products to come in so that, our industries become more innovative. So this is how
right.
most of...
As you say that, my mind goes back to the late 70s, the late mid to mid 80s in the United Kingdom, when, as you said it, my mind went towards something called ease of doing business. And I look at the complete bureaucratic mess that is required for an ordinary man to walk into the local provincial council and to register a business name. I know this because I have first-hand experience and so on. But in the 80s, under Margaret Thatcher took out all the red tape that she could get hold of and chucked it into the nearest dustbin, and forever gone. Long years before, it is now the sort of in thing to talk about ease of doing business, index, and all that business. I'm quite sure that when Margaret Thatcher was around, taking Britain out of the bureaucratic mess, that they never spoke about ease of doing business. How does one, address that in this country? The most rudimentary business to be registered at a provincial level, just a business name, takes ever and a couple of days longer.
That's another point we have to focus on. Ease of doing business. Like if you look at the country that ranks number one, it's New Zealand. It takes half a day to register a company. In Sri Lanka, it's 2 weeks if you're lucky for a limited liability company. But for us, one point that a lot of people forget is to close down a limited liability company, it takes almost a year. So many investors I spoke to, they are like reluctant to register a company because if an investor walks out or there's a plan to change, you have to go through a long process to close down a firm. So ease of doing business helps a lot because, if you look at, for example, in the World Bank rankings, we are 162nd when it comes to enforcing business law. So it takes around, even in Colombo, it takes 4 years to, resolve a business case. So this is something that foreign investors look at. So one thing, like I always see Sri Lanka's policy, if you look at the BOI and others, it's always about, tax exemptions, for businesses coming in. But if you look at the example of California, California has one of the highest tax rates inside the US, and most large companies move there. France has a government revenue for GDP of around 40%, while we are at 8% just. So they still draw in investment. So we need to move away from this thing that, tax cuts are the one and only incentive that drives in foreign direct investment. So ease of doing business helps a lot. It also, if you can make it more simpler to do business here, it also can make a lot of businesses become more formal. So that's also another option that can drive in higher tax revenues.
I remember when the well-known and successful and experienced hotelier, Mr. Chandravikram Singh, when he bought a group of, I think, 350 ladies from Europe for an event that was held up in towards Kandy. And in a conversation, he told me how difficult it was to get permission for them to use this lake, so these people, Osman could use it. And he bemoaned the fact that if only they could have made the application online, it would have been far easier. So perhaps that's what you're also saying, that we must make more use of technology.
Definitely. I mean, we have to digitize a lot of things. But at the same time, it's not just a thing, but it's also the sort of inconsistency, the sort of confusion that arises. Recently, I was attending a lecture at the Institute of Policy Studies where they showed the ministries, how they have been changing. Ministries, at one point, the youth ministry and the sports ministry were tied together. And sorry if I get the names wrong, but then one of the ministries were tied to something totally out of line, it's the sports ministry and education ministry or something.
Yes,
I forgot.
but
the whole point is that, yes, there's a lot of inconsistency, ministry secretaries being changed, ministers being shuffled around. So what a lot of businesses, when I talk to a number of foreign investors who want to come into Sri Lanka from India, they told me that, listen, it's not taxes, it's not other things. Just give us a consistent policy for the next 10 years that, this is going to be the tax rate, this is going to be fixed. So that is all we want, because most companies, as you know, plan at least 5 years ahead. So the sort of inconsistencies, that is one of the major issues facing businesses.
And thank you. Our guest tonight is Mr. Talal Rafi, who's an economist, and we're talking about how to grow Sri Lanka's economy. We've spoken about reputation and so on. Can I take you to another point, which is a big concern, and that is the plight of the SMEs. If I speak to you about the tourism sector, and I speak to several hoteliers of all sizes, from the top to the bottom, they're all talking about, especially the SMEs, are talking about that they have to pay their interest. The government really has not done anything in real terms. And people, before government people start phoning me on 0772 300 305 or texting me, let me say this, that the government had a moratorium, yeah, but by the very nature of that word, it's only a moratorium. They didn't write anything off. They didn't offer concessionary anything. And today, these small hoteliers and large hoteliers and all the hoteliers and other businesses, the SMEs as well, they're having to pay interest on interest, especially in that 3-year period when we had COVID and everything else, crashed. And then before that, we had the Easter bombings and so on. So how possible, Tala, is it for the government to actually say, okay, we're going to write this amount of interest off and do a deal with the banks so that the banks don't hold the baby? How possible is it?
So for us to answer that question, I mean, the government is in a tough spot. So to be truthful, it would be nice for the government to help out. But from the knowledge I have, though I don't work at the ministry, but the thing is, like, I think the government is quite constrained in its act. One thing is, after the Central Bank Act, you cannot print money as you would have before. So on the other hand, you're unable to borrow as well. You're just giving out bills on the local market, but large-scale borrowing is not possible. So at this time, I think there is a sort of a fiscal constraint on how far the government can go towards helping this. So that is a question. So there is only one other way, that is to increase taxes.
How on earth do you increase state revenue when, I'll give you the sort of caveat, if you like, our economy has contracted. It's around 12% contraction. That's provided the figures are correct and believable. So we'll just take it as it is because it comes out of the central bank. Contracted by 12%. But if we look at, say, the American economy, there are different ways of doing this. But the American model is to grow the economy, have as many people as possible working, and then come and start addressing other issues like taxation and so on, because then you've got a big market, you've got far more people. So like that, Sri Lanka appears to me to be going the other way. They're contracting the economy and hoping that some magic wand will appear from somewhere. And it's a bit rich from our president, who said the other day, oh, we should help ourselves. But he's the one who came in saying that he can bring money in because he offers a different brand of politics and democracy and so on. But sorry, it doesn't seem to have worked. We're not paying our foreign, servicing our foreign loans. We've declared bankruptcy, and they're using that money to bring in fuel so that we don't have any fuel cuts. But fuel is actually rationed, but I think from yesterday that rationing has gone out. I, the skeptic, would say that the QR code's been taken out because the public don't have enough money anyway to fill as much fuel as they want. What's your answer to that?
So, Faraz, if you look at the economy, like we were literally bankrupt last year. So with just $25 million with the central bank. So I think that though I don't fully agree with the president, it takes time. It's like Sri Lanka was in the ICU, and you've just come out, and you cannot walk or run as like others do. There has to be some sort of a time to heal, because we have to first sort of stabilize before going forward.
Well, when you talk about ICUs and so on, I was at an ICU once, and then I was transferred to the CCU. But in between all this, and you talk about the constraints of the president. I think that my Dr. Prakash also had constraints. He could have lied to me and told me that everything was rosy, but he didn't. He laid it on the line. He sat there and said, if you do this, this will happen. But if you do that, well, then, even Dr. Prakash can't hold you. So the message is, let's be honest. Let's tell the people the way it really is, not to try and fine coat it with political sayings, looking at elections that don't seem to be held now anyway. What do you say about that?
Yes, of course. Because one thing is, for us, if you look at the whole recovery program, one of the stumbling blocks in the way is a political instability. We have a presidential election, so there is going to be likely a shift towards away from hard reforms towards more populist policies, because let's face it, even the President Ranil Wickremesinghe wants to be re-elected. So that is one of the things. But coming back to the old question, do we have the space to grow like the US? Actually, if you look at, we were talking about taxes, Sri Lanka has one of the lowest government revenue to GDP ratios in the world at around 8%. So there has to be some sort of a thing done. I mean, this wasn't always the case. When former President Ranasinghe Premadasa, senior President Premadasa was in power in the 90s, our government revenue to GDP ratio was at around 20%, which is a normal thing. And our expenditure is just around 19 to 20%, which is normal. The problem is that we are not getting the enough revenues. So basically, one reason would be, I'm definitely against raising the tax rates, because right now, if you look at the way the tax structure is put in, anyone earning about 300,000 rupees would be paying around 36%, which is unfair. But what we can do is, a lot of people agree, is that the tax base is too small. If you look at people who have income tax files, it's just 50,000 for a population of 22 million. And you just see outside, there are over 1 million vehicles. I mean, each of them would be, the minimum value would be 3 to 4 million rupees. So that base should be sort of increased. And And one key factor is, like, if you look at the example of, for example, another country such as Georgia, what they did was they made it easier, a flat out rate for corporate and personal income taxes. But more than anything, I think this should relate to Sri Lanka, is they got rid of tax exemptions. If you look at the 1990s, during the time of President Premadasa and early years of President Chandrika Bandaranaike, it was like the rubber, coconut, and the tea industries paid a large amount of taxes to sustain it. But later, right now, the other industries, we've started giving a lot of tax exemptions, so which is clearly not fair. So the amounts that should have been coming to the government are not coming. So here again, that is one of the issues. And for us, if I can, though this is not related to revenue, the other thing I want to talk about is SOE reforms, or the size of the public sector. You know, in 2021, 86% of government revenue went to paying salaries and pensions of state-owned enterprises and state sector workers. So this is clearly unsustainable. So if you paid 100,000 rupees in taxes in 2021, 86,000 rupees of your tax money goes to paying salaries and pensions, which is clearly not sustainable, because in 2005, our population wasn't that different to right now. But in 2005, the state sector was only 700,000 strong. By mid-2010s, it was almost doubled. So that is one of the things that, and another specific example is Sri Lankan Airlines. In 2021, the losses made by Sri Lankan Airlines was 1% of GDP. The entire social security net, the flow put by the IMF for Samudi and others was 0.6%. So if we can get rid of just one loss-making state-owned enterprise, Sri Lankan Airlines, we can literally triple social security spending.
Talal Rafi, thank you very much for being on Newsline this evening with me. And it's now back to the next program. But in the meantime, thank you for watching. Take care. Have a great evening as much as you can. And God bless you all.